The memories that are stored from people who play D&D are stored in the part of the brain where memories about yourself are, as opposed to memories about a character.
This is the first ever Nerd Jam Dungeons & Dragons podcast. My name is Matthew Wallen. I'm your host today. I'm joined by two very brilliant people who have been playing Dungeons & Dragons for a long time. The goal is to discuss Dungeons & Dragons from a perspective of experience, but we are going to be starting off with some content for the uninitiated D&D player. If you've never played before, you're interested in maybe learning a little more about it. This is a great resource for you, but also we just want you to sit back, have fun, listen to some guys talk about Dungeons & Dragons, and I'm joined today by...
I'm Athey and McGhee. I've been DM for about 3 years.
And the other half of my Genius Roundtable today is...
I'm Hunter Cormier. I have been a player for 3 years and a DM for 2, so I'm a relatively new DM. I'm just very passionate about D&D and writing in general.
See, it's funny to me that you say you've been doing DMing for 2 years, but you consider yourself a new DM. Why is that?
Because there's so much like nuance, and DMing really is more of an art than just something you just like start off and be good at. So to do it for 2 years when the game's been out since the 70s, and you've got pros out there that are like, oh yeah, we've been gaming with our butts for like 30 years. I would say I'm still relatively new, but I know a humble amount about writing. And so I think that's where a lot of my experience in the game comes in.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm super glad that you guys could join me today. This is going to be a lot of fun. So because it is a Dungeons & Dragons podcast today, I just want to practice a little bit of DMing myself. You are a character, and you're a wizard, and you're very wise and clever. This is for both of you. I am stupid, and I walk in and I say, hey guys, what is Dungeons & Dragons? You as the sage wizard, could you please describe to me what the fuck is Dungeons & Dragons?
I guess I would tell this like peasant, assumably, that Dungeons & Dragons in general is a collaborative storytelling game that is really just consists of a bunch of rules that can be applied to everyday occurrences in life, like little things like trying to catch a ball, or climbing over a wall,
or explaining a game in a podcast.
Right. In video game terms, it's a lot like a highly immersive open world with no invisible walls, or just like denied actions, like like I can't jump, for whatever reason,
Well, that's a lot of the appeal too, because there are rules. But certainly when you play a video game, you're limited by programming. Whereas with a game like Dungeons & Dragons, I guess maybe you're limited by imagination, or group vote, perhaps. But it sounds like that's maybe more of the appeal.
Pretty much, yeah. It's very liberating coming from video games to be able to say, like, well, I came up with this unique and clever solution. Like, can I do this? And the game just is like, yeah, like if you can come up with it, like your character is as capable as you are, creatively speaking, when it comes to like problem solving and that sort of thing. And that sort of gives you a narrative control. That means that every time you play the game, you're going to have a very unique experience that's tailored to you as a person.
Okay. In that same sense, I've seen in celebrity D&D games like Chris Perkins award inspiration or bonuses based off of clever problem solving or thinking outside of the box, where it's like, shit, man, I didn't even think about that. That's a good one. Is that something maybe you do in your games?
I generally reward good roleplay with in-game benefits.
Okay.
So like if you form a relationship with like a tribe of orcs that you rescued, then that will come back in the form of like maybe now you have access to trading with them and having orcish weapons and armor. But that happened because you decided to work with these people instead of killing them. And so like unlike a video game where really only one potential thing could happen, like you can't talk to the orcs, you have to kill them or something like that unless you're playing like a BioWare game. You have the freedom of choice. And that's something only tabletop RPGs can do because of the programming limitations.
Cool. Athey, what is D&D?
Well, for me, it's a way of storytelling that it already has kind of a structure, and then you can basically create the story with you and a bunch of your friends, and you kind of help guide it a little bit while it grows. But it's definitely a way for like a group of friends or anything like that just to like come together, and it's a good kind of
good wholesome Christian fun.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Which is ironic because I was not allowed to play Dungeons and Dragons because my mom thought it was demonic.
Yeah.
The satanic scare.
The satanic
of the
scare.
17,
The
the
tieflings,
80s, I think.
the tieflings and the acid scared her away. So. Okay. Anything else you want to add as far as what is Dungeons and Dragons, guys?
Well, I mean, if you don't know what Dungeons and Dragons is, it is a game played around a table, usually, and it's either theater of the mind or you have miniatures out in front of you with your character sheets. And you basically just have a DM who guides your story along as you just kind of work through any kind of setting. It can be futuristic, fantasy. I've even seen some that are like modern day, where you at this table are playing basically yourselves, and you just have fun doing it. At its most basic concept.
Yeah, a group of people get together at a table and play through the coolest story they can all think of.
That sounds fun.
It's fucking awesome.
So I know that as far as we just mentioned that there is no programming. There are some rules. When it comes to story, there are no rules aside from there are some things we'll probably get into as far as metagaming and some things like that. There are some basic rules. As far as the environment rules, the game itself, combat. How do you determine statistics? Is there there's a character sheet that kind of has these I don't know, these numbers and these attributes and characteristics. Could you guys talk just basic character sheets and basic combat, things like that?
Well, the most important part of a character sheet is going to be that left side with all of your attributes in strength, dexterity, constitution, wisdom, intelligence, and I can't remember the last one. Charisma. Thank you.
Nice.
Yeah, and those are your most.
I've played clerics, guys. I know.
Hell yeah.
I know about some
Charisma
charisma.
clerics.
Oh yeah. And those numbers are usually either kind of depends on how your team wants to play it, but you can either do a totally random, which is where you roll dice for those numbers. Usually you roll 4 dice and take away the lowest one, and then that is your base.
Do you ever roll a character sheet where you take the lowest one and that is the stat for everything? Is that a thing? No?
Like you roll an 8 and everything's an 8?
Yeah.
That seems terrible. Not gonna lie.
You could do that.
Just incompetence.
If you wanted to.
You just call it amateur hour. You can't get anything done.
It can be fun to be bad at things in D&D.
Yeah, I can see where it is fun, but only in some attributes. Like, I wouldn't say -1 to everything, because that's what if you rolled an 8 on every one of your rolls, that's technically just a -1.
Oh, yeah.
To everything that you do.
Because for the uninitiated, there are modifiers that help you do things throughout the game. You're going to be rolling dice, and that just adds to the chance of a little bit of luck or Maybe it exemplifies preparation that you made in the game, but there's an element of chance to it. You do have to roll dice to determine whether or not you're successful at certain things, and those statistics like strength and dexterity, all of those things, without getting too in depth, add to your ability to accomplish those goals. Is that right?
Yes, the math can be very intimidating. Like, I know when I was a new player and I was looking at my character sheet, I was like, what the hell is all this? But as you become more familiar with the way the game works, you realize that the numbers are more representative of your character being good and bad at things, as far as like, okay, so say you're making an athletics check to climb up a wall, right? If you're not a strong person, your number will be lower. And so when you roll that die to like represent, the chance of anybody doing this, you then factor in like, well, am I a strong person or am I a weak person? And that's really what those numbers are. You kind of just have to trust that the math is there to smoothly represent the transition between these character traits. And just try not to get too overwhelmed with it. If you were a new player, I would say make a character sheet with somebody who knows what they're doing, who can hopefully like put those numbers in layman's terms for you and help you understand like what this is actually going to look like, as opposed to just being like a +3 or like a +4 on your sheet.
Yeah, and that just goes to you're going to have a dungeon master. I mean, I can't imagine a new player would be DMing out of the gate. You're going to have somebody there that's guiding the game and can kind of show you the ropes and teach you. So the moral of the story, like Hunter said, is don't be intimidated, because at the end of the day, you've got a dungeon master who can guide you. You're probably playing with other characters who can help you out with that. So, like he said, he was intimidated, and I just want to throw out there, don't be daunted if you're maybe thinking about getting into the game and you kind of check some things out and you're like, there's no THAC0 anymore. What is an armor class? What is AC? What are these modifiers? You're going to have somebody that's kind of helping you out. And there's some good apps out there that can help you build those character sheets too. And Athey, do you have anything to add on character sheets?
Well, funny thing is when you said you're not going to DM out of the gate, I actually did.
Really?
And while it was hard and really daunting, I wouldn't also if you don't have that person in your group of friends who's already played this, don't be afraid to actually just go for it. And don't be like things like the other friends in this would like make fun of you because they've never done this before. And then it's just a learning experience for all of y'all.
That's interesting. So Before we move on, let's talk about that for just a second. How did that night go?
It was it was a lot of us just trying to. It was a lot like wrangling cats, and because I didn't understand that.
You didn't understand cat wrangling?
Yeah, I'd never taken a course in it. But yeah, like trying to get your players to go the direction you want, especially when you all don't know how to do that, was pretty tough. But eventually we got to that point where we were all very comfortable in doing whatever role we decided to do. And as a new DM, even if you've never done it, it'll come to you eventually. Like, don't let a couple of bad sessions kind of ruin that. And even you might think it's a bad session for you. I've had it several times where it's like, that was a shitty session, and then people I'm playing with are like, oh man, that was awesome.
As a DM or as a player? As a DM?
As a DM, I thought I've had bad sessions, and then had players who are like, oh, that was awesome. You might think it's bad, and you might think it's kind of weird, but your players will probably for the most part, they understand.
Mm-hmm. So I know you guys have some talking points, and we've been going for about 15 minutes. I just want to try to wrap up some beginner stuff real quick. I guess one thing we should talk about beyond the character sheet is, what is a dungeon master?
Okay, well, D&D is essentially a storytelling platform, and the dungeon master is the person who is essentially the storyteller, which kind of is like playing God for your D&D setting. So basically, your players, each player controls their own character, and generally they have a good amount of narrative control. They can decide, what their character's personality is, how they interact with people. The dungeon master plays the role of every other person in the entire universe. So the dungeon master controls the bad guys, generally. The dungeon master speaks for all the NPCs, like, I am the bartender, I am the merchant, I am the little old lady, trying to cross the street.
Do you often, as a DM, this is for both of you, do you use voices?
Yes.
I am not the best at voices, so generally no.
What's your old lady voice?
In the game, it's usually just this. Maybe like a little, yes, honey.
Oh dear.
Oh dear.
My poor ankle.
I cannot carry the sack of potatoes to my cart.
Let me ask you this. Is that more of a you thing, or is it more for the benefit of the player and their imagination to help them get into the story?
The benefit of the player.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the reason I don't really do it a lot is I'm, I guess, not confident in that way. Sometimes it's just, I don't know. But yes, it is definitely like a way to immerse your player characters in this world by giving other characters like
their own distinct voice.
I understand that completely. It's actually for that reason I don't use webcams.
Okay.
Because my game is entirely online. I use Roll20, which is a website that essentially lets me run the game using art. So like images layered on top of each other, which allows me to put characters on maps and that kind of thing, coupled with music. And so what I found was when I was a player at first, I played with a bunch of veterans who all used voices. And I wasn't comfortable doing that as a player. So I was like, man, my character sounds like me, because that's what I'm comfortable with.
My character's a mute. He doesn't talk.
But the thing is, like, when you're looking at this art, like this image that represents this character, this token, and you're hearing a voice, you're associating that voice with that image. So the voice helps, like, especially when you don't see the person who's, like, making that voice, the voice is just different. You're just like, okay, like, this voice is this lady over here, like this voice is this guy over here, and you kind of have to be willing to sound or look like an idiot in order to give voices like the proper inflections, unless you just have like a super chill, composed face the whole time, which, like, I don't know, I have to like get into character in order to do that. But it makes your universe feel more real, like these are actual people that you're dealing with, because not everybody, everybody doesn't sound like exactly the same person. That's my experience with it anyway.
Well, and especially on something like, it's Roll20, right? Roll20.net.
Right.
I've used that in the past, and there was one girl in the party. Everyone else it was kind of hard to tell who was who sometimes. Mm-hmm. So it makes it a little bit easier, I would assume, to kind of differentiate between what character is saying this, and then it just, you don't have to like look and see like a bar is moving. You're just like, oh, that's that guy, That's the old grumpy guy, because he's talking all grumpy and shit. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, or if you're looking like an image of like a dude in shining armor, and he's like, I, swing my sword in the name of righteousness. Then it's like, okay, dude, that guy's a fucking paladin, that's cool. Like,
Have you ever looked at a picture and picked a voice that was counterintuitive just to throw people off or just to make it more interesting? Because sometimes you see a big, tall guy who just kind of talks like this. In real life, it can happen. So.
In general,
there's a paladin in some world somewhere that talks like this, guys. Hey, let's kill them bad guys.
Let's do it. In general, I play kind of a genre which is referred to as grimdark. It's a like heavy realism, I like to kind of explore like moral and philosophical like experiences that you might not necessarily have, in real world. So I don't run a super silly game, although I do put like silly things in there. Probably the silliest thing I've done is I found a race called Furbolgs, which are actually like a pretty solid race, right? But I didn't read any of the lore. I just didn't. I just looked at the pictures, and I looked at like this like beardy, hippie looking giant guys, and I was like, that to me, I was just like, that's fucking stupid. Like, I'm just gonna like put this race in there, and they're just dumb farmers, like uneducated, like, oh, I can't really help you with anything you're trying to do. Like, I'll do my best, but I don't know,
You want to talk about tilling? I can tell you about that.
I can tell you all about tilling.
In my campaign, furbugs are all stoners.
Yeah.
They don't do shit. They literally just eat mushrooms and lay around in the forest.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't want to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but and this could easily be a rabbit hole. You don't necessarily have to follow the lore. You can do more of like a homebrew style. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
The lore it's been successful in its own way, but the lore doesn't appeal to everybody. Like a lot of people, like back in the day, like they played Dungeons and Dragons like quietly. They didn't like tell a bunch of people, oh, like I fucking follow, whoever, Paylor, But like if you want to take these D&D rules and you want to do like a modern dark fantasy set in the modern day with like guns and cars, like you can do that.
And even the DMG has there's a page in the Dungeon Master's Guide that is it tells you the stats of pistols, of laser weapons, of like laser sword,
Nerf guns?
I haven't seen that, but I'd probably give you like
Dear Wizards.
that's probably at 1 point.
That's one of and that's one of the great things about it is like, there's not a stat for a Nerf gun, but like you understand how the rules work, so you just say Nerf gun does like
at 1 point.
1 point of
Maybe.
damage,
and it has to be those like really like hard ones.
So it's like if there's not already a rule in place, you can make up a rule for it. But like it can be any setting. And the nice thing about D&D is it can be any style of game as well. If you want to do like a Game of Thrones style political intrigue, like behind the scenes plotting style game where the players are like uncovering secrets and there's betrayals and plot twists, you can do that. If you want to do like a more just like kick down the door, like let's get together, have some beer and pretzels and just have like a lighthearted combat session, like you can do something like that too. There's a lot of flexibility.
As players, you've both been players for you said 3 years.
3 years.
You've
3
played.
years.
You've been a player.
I've
for
been
a while.
on like this. Yeah, we have different games during the week, and I'm sometimes DM them. I'm sometimes player.
Have you ever seen a game where you were a player, not the DM, where the DM came up with something homebrewed and everyone revolted? Where everyone was like, "What? Your Nerf gun is instant kill?" Just as an example, something that like seems counterintuitive. Where you're like, "Whoa, wait a minute, really? That ever happened?"
Well, as a player character, like we always have to kind of trust the DM that, like, if they have a PC that has an insta kill Nerf gun, for the most part, a DM will have a reason for that, and you kind of trust them going into that. Like, oh, this guy does have like a Nerf gun. That's this, but it plays into this plot line and this thing, and then like this opens up a whole new quest or something for you to do. It's usually not just random like, and he has a stick that if you ever touch it, it casts a ray of death on you.
You trust there's a reason.
Death word, yeah.
Yeah.
You trust that there's a reason, and for the most part, DMs do have a reason for that.
Yeah, and if you don't know, that's one of those like social agreement things where it's just like you don't really interrupt the game doing it, but maybe after the game you're like, hey man, like I didn't really understand what was going on here. Like, can you clarify
What was up with that Nerf gun, man?
What was up with that insta kill Nerf gun? And I mean, it's entirely possible that like you might just have a bad DM or a bad group, and like maybe that's the right game for somebody else, but it's not necessarily the right game for you.
Which is an interesting point, because you really do. There needs to be team chemistry, I feel like with any sport, really. But any multiplayer game or any time you're playing with more than one person, you really need chemistry, and you need to all get along and be on the same page. So I guess that is important for new players, to make sure you're finding the right game that fits you, the right DM that fits you. And that's probably the best way you're going to have the most fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you definitely need to have a group that you jive with. Like, if I didn't have the group that I did when I started, I probably wouldn't either not as frequently or still be playing D&D now.
Yeah, that's one of the things about D&D is, like, if you have a bad first experience, a lot of times you'll just be like, well, this is what D&D is. Mm-hmm. And, like, I don't want to fuck with that ever again.
A good analogy for having a bad experience would probably be going to floating for the first time and getting very badly sunburned. Probably a very good analogy.
That never happens. Oh, poor thing. Also, I don't want to get too. I don't have much experience in Dungeons and Dragons, but I did do some DMing, and one of the very frustrating things was I had a lot of people that said they were going to join the game that didn't, or would flake at the last minute, and just little things like that, where you need a consistent group that's going to show up, because if you have somebody that is like, say your party is in a dungeon and you're like halfway through it, and then you have to reconvene later and somebody's not there, it's like, well, where's that guy? And it throws off party chemistry, and as far as in-game combat and things like that, probably. And it's just also like, where'd that guy go, you know? So yeah, I think that's extremely important, to find the right group and find that chemistry.
Oh yeah.
So I know you guys have some talking points. Hunter, let's start with you. Is there anything you want to just kind of discuss with me and Athey?
Let me see. I really, as far as like interviewing each other, I don't have a whole lot of talking points. The only things that were really left was like advice for new players and DMs for me.
Were we slowly hitting all of your points?
Slowly, yeah.
Cool.
Honestly, like I wanted to talk about.
Didn't even try that.
I wanted to talk about describing D&D gameplay.
Let's talk about that. Yeah. Are you talking about like combat?
Well, we basically already covered that. I mean, really, it's one of those things that like you learn by playing it, right? Like you don't be like, nobody hands you like a thick ass phone book, you know, of football rules, and you're like, okay, like this is, you know, the rules of football, and that's how you learn, like, oh, this is a fun game, you know, look at all these rules I just read. You learn by playing it.
I mean, the rule book for Dungeons and Dragons, like both for, there's two different rule books for the most part. There's a lot of rules books, but the two that you need is the Dungeon Master's Guide and Player's Handbook. Both of them are probably maybe half an inch thick. Like, they are not very thick books.
Yeah, they're not bad at all, really.
And they're big, but mostly because they have a lot of pictures.
And the idea is to be more familiarized with it than to memorize it.
You don't read it as a book. You reference it as you need it. If you're playing a cleric, you don't need to know about barbarians. Mm-hmm. You don't need to know a lot of shit in that book, really. You just need to know about your class.
That's a good point.
You need to know the spells at the end of the book.
Right. And that's why having a veteran player or somebody who knows what they're doing can sort of help navigate you. And like, if you don't have any veteran friends, go to a card shop. You know, go to a game shop nearby, and like those dudes behind the counter, like they're just fucking chilling there all day long, man. They'll have a great time helping you for free.
Yeah,
and they'll probably give you some really good advice because they probably play a lot themselves.
Also, another way to kind of understand some things is there's a lot of podcasts out there of people playing Dungeons and Dragons, and some that have been playing Dungeons and Dragons since like the fucking 80s, like. Was it Harmon's Quest? That guy, I think, played in first edition when he started. Like, that's what he started in like the 70s, like where it was a stapled pamphlet of rules.
Critical Role consists of a cast of like very famous, very established voice actors. So when you're listening to it, like you're listening to characters like play the game, and with a very established voice actor as the DM.
I see. I didn't realize they were voice actors.
Oh yeah, like those people are on like Dragon Ball Z. Like they are established.
You got like
voice
Sean
actors.
Schimmel playing D&D or something.
They have like the DM is Matthew Mercer, and he's done he's Soldier 70, or he's McGhee in Overwatch. He's several voices in like Resident Evil series. Like
Nice.
he's in everything, and then like
Is that the guy with like the hair down to his like shoulder?
yeah, he's like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
like everyone
does
always,
this a
like,
lot.
Yeah, he's very expressive, very awesome DM.
I don't know if it was Critical Role. I saw a game with Vin Diesel.
That was Critical Role.
That was Critical Role. Okay.
Yeah. He was what is he was promoting his
Witch Hunter.
the
Yeah.
last Witch Hunter.
Yeah.
Which,
So
I
he
mean,
was
if
like a
you're-
witch hunter character or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, he played a Witch Hunter.
And he has the perfect voice for D&D, like voice role play. Is that what you would call that? Voice role play.
And
He did
Basically,
another
yeah.
one recently with is it John Oliver?
Really?
oh, maybe.
Maybe it was one of those hosts.
That's so cool.
But he did it, and like this guy hadn't played D&D since he was a freshman in college, and I'm gonna look it up right now.
Well, and see, that just goes to show, even if you're not playing D&D, maybe you can't get a game together, maybe you can't find the right game that fits you, or you're just trying to learn, there's some really cool things out there that you can watch. For me, it was Penny Arcade. And the PAX Live games. It started off with Will Wheaton, and it's been a couple of other people rotated in since, but like Scott Kurtz. But it was just really fun to watch them play. They had more fun with it than some people. I think Critical Role is a little more of a serious game, even though they have a lot of fun. It's less silly, less jokey. But yeah, lots of cool games out there that you can check out, and that in itself is very fun sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking, and it's a great example, The Last Witch Hunter, really, because we were talking about D&D as a storytelling platform, and the thing is, there is the established lore, which, like, I don't know very much of at all, honestly, for all my experience. You can make your own setting, you can play a pre-written module, but, like, man, because it's so applicable to rule set, you can apply it to, like, a video game, a movie, a TV series. If you ever wanted to play if you ever played Bloodborne, you're like, man, it'd be cool to be a character in this universe. What would that feel like? Just play D&D set in Bloodborne.
Yeah.
Like a TV show, you know,
Yeah.
Game of Thrones.
I've definitely I have a campaign going right now where I've made for the seminal piece of art that is Treasure Planet, the most forgettable Disney movie.
Mm-hmm. I love Treasure Planet.
I love Treasure Planet too, but like you say, Treasure Planet. Like,
I didn't say I love it. I said I remember it.
Oh, you remember it? I love
Treasure Planet.
I love Treasure Planet.
Treasure Planet was great.
It was cool.
It's so much so that I made a campaign around that where we're basically just space pirates, and spells are now just give them a mechanical flair, and that's how it works. Like fireball is you literally making a fireball out of a cannon or something. Like,
But like when it comes to like immersive tension, you know, like you got games like Call of Duty, which like shake the camera, and they use tricks to make you feel like, holy shit, like I'm crawling through this grass, right? But like when you've been authoring, like writing your character for a year, and your character is in a life or death situation, you were like, fuck, this is a year's worth of my personal time and work invested in this situation. Like, I have to, like, make this work. And it's interesting because you can see the players dealing with, like, very real immediate tension. And it's awesome.
and then when you lose a character, it's also like it can get pretty intense.
So,
Like
Tears, dude.
like I've had several campaigns
losing
where
their shit.
people like not just the person who died is crying, but like everyone in character is like Niagara Falls over losing their friend in this game, which
It's a real project for everybody.
for the most part, the next session they're gonna write another character and just bring them in. Like
But that's an interesting distinction between like a video game and D&D, because if I play a video game, it's like, oh, well, that character was programmed to die and that just happened and it's fine and I've got other characters, whereas, or, you know, you just res them. Whereas with D&D, like the stakes are a little bit higher in that regard. Like when you do have those weekly sessions and people are coming together and you start to familiarize yourself with those characters and get attached to them like you would a character in, you know, a TV show or something, and then they die. That sounds like some pretty real shit.
Yeah, and like when you look at people playing D&D, it's a bunch of people sitting around a table rolling dice, right? But when you're playing the game yourself, what it feels like is the way a well-written book feels when it's just smoothly flowing and you're like watching it in your head. And so the experience that the players are having is completely different than what it looks like they're having from the outside. And there was a study that I'd heard about where they found that the memories that are stored from people who play D&D are stored in the part of the brain where memories about yourself are, as opposed to memories about like a character or something else. So for a lot of people, that immersion, that first-person experience is a pretty fantastic thing.
That's actually really cool. Bringing in science.
How about that shit?
Science, name drop. No, that's actually really cool. And when you think about it, one might even go further and say that's like your child. Like it's almost like a parent-child sort of relationship where it's like, I birthed you from the first roll of your strength stat, you know? Mm-hmm. And when you create backstories for your character, which we should probably talk on. So let's discuss backstories and motivations, and that's the part that you get to decide on as a player, whereas the DM kind of molds the game and the universe and the world. You get to create that one aspect within this world, and that's yours. That is your thing. So let's talk about a bit about backstories and just the development of that. Not the stats, not the charisma, but the other things that make up that character, the essence.
Especially for new players, I think backstories is one of the most important things you can have for your character, just because you don't know, like when you put in the situation, you're like, oh, I would do this, especially when you first start out, like, oh, I would do this, but you don't really like, yes, I would kill this man, he's killing this, and this, but if you're a paladin, you're not supposed to do that, like, and it's like really easy if you kind of make a backstory for each of your characters. You can kind of pull off that, and you don't even have to like explain this to the group, but like you can just pull off these experiences that you necessarily may not have had, but like your character hates werebores because werebores killed his family, and like that makes him basically just a xenophobe, and he only likes humans.
What's a xenophobe?
Someone who hates a race.
Okay.
Someone who hates like an entire
Yikes.
race, or hates everything except for like humans.
I'm okay. I
killed my father.
I'm okay. I didn't know that.
Role playing is definitely a creative muscle. You'll sometimes get to players, or you'll have players, and we kind of touched on party comp earlier, but like if you have players that are like writers who create scenes, like you'll sometimes get people and they'll almost have too much. It's like, here's 10 pages of backstory, right? But more commonly, I have seen like if you have these new players, they're like, okay, like I made a character, like what do I do? You know, and you'll have DMs who start the game and they're like, okay, you guys are all in a tavern, what do you say to each other? And that's kind of trickier for a lot of new players because they're like, I don't know, like I haven't had time to know what my character feels like. And a lot of times you'll make a character and you'll be like, okay, I got a pretty good idea how this is. But when you're actually role playing that character, it's the little things that you sort of pick up, like oh, my character doesn't like wine, you know, I like hard liquor only, but like I turn my nose up at wine, that maybe you come up with in the moment, but then you're like, okay, that's perfect. I think something that would help a lot of new players who aren't terribly accustomed to playing their character is when you start the game, come up with a goal intended to change the setting in some regard. Or let me put it this way, come up with a goal that gives you something to do every place you visit. So if your goal is like, everywhere I go, I want to elevate the status and influence of my party in that particular town. It's like, well, maybe this town over here is like, you know, an aristocracy, and this town over here is ruled by a tyrant. It's like, you're going to have a different situation going to both of those places, but you're going to have something to do, and you're never going to be like, you know, I spend the day drinking, you know, because like, I don't want anything other than the immediate quest, you know?
Well, and motivation, I feel like, is very important when it comes to building those backstories. What does your player, or what does your character want? What are their goals? And whenever I've looked at some resources of trying to understand that aspect of the game a little bit more, one of the things that stood out to me was a good DM will find out what a character what a character wants, and will try to incorporate that into the story. Have you guys ever done that one before?
Oh yeah.
I've definitely had campaigns like where I've had everyone like write down what their long term, like what they want their character to kind of end up as or end up doing. Like maybe they were like a lord when they were a child, and then it was taken over, and they somehow escaped with the skull remain. But like when they grow up, they want to take back that castle and incorporate that, or they want to find this long lost relic of their families that they like will bring honor back to their clan or something like that. And you can just incorporate that into the world yourself before you even start, just so you can have these kind of ties in. And like if like a group helps the knight go find his family sword and retrieve it, then he's going to be kind of honor bound to help. So, like, it kind of pulls in all the characters together. Like we were saying, like it's hard to do to just sit down at a tavern because you don't know these people. Like your character doesn't know these people. It's hard to just kind of like start making connections right off the bat. But if you kind of put these storylines in,
Yeah, and it's pretty easy to make stuff up too. Like if you're helping a knight, you know, find his family sword, like Athey suggested, it's like, well, maybe that knight is in exile and he hasn't been home in a while. Maybe before you find that family sword, you come across your grandfather's butler, you know, who was let go of years and years ago. Off in some town, you just bump into him, and he's like, "Oh my God, like I haven't seen you since you were a baby." Like, no, I don't know where your father's sword is, or your great grandpa's sword is, but like, you know, I do have this old key to your house back on the other side of the world map. You know, maybe this will help you or something like that. Like I never planned on going back, but they always told me like if you need to come back, like you have a key, so you can make it kind of realistic too. But it's like in this little way you can sort of like seed in these other things. And you can work with the player on that and be like, hey, are you okay with there being a butler? You know, maybe they'll be like, oh, that's not the way I saw it, you know? And there are people too, you gotta work with them sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think if you plan to have a game that's going to be lasting for, you know, I'm sure you guys have games that have lasted years. It's all the more reason to not rush those things coming out. Like it's not all going to happen in 1 week, one session where it's like, okay, you get your goal, you get your goal, you get your goal. I think it's just a package delivery. Oh, it's all good. Yeah, so it's just a matter of playing the long game and not trying to lump it all in at once and just letting it slowly develop so that it's more entertaining and also more satisfying when it does finally happen a month or two later, when you start to get that whiff of that goal, and then it drives the characters a little bit more. So we've been doing this for 45 minutes. I feel like we could do this for hours if we wanted to. I think you guys are probably on the same page. Let's go ahead and start to wrap up. I do have one pretty salacious question to ask you guys at the end, but do either one of you have anything you want to add? It could be anything from top to bottom about D&D.
Do you want to do cover advice for new players and advice for DMs real quick?
Yeah.
Quick points.
I'm trying to think right now, and I fucking can't.
Yeah, well, and that just goes to show that there are just so many things to touch on and so many aspects of the game. From, I mean, when you say it's so broad of a question, like advice for a DM. Well, are you talking about rules? Are you talking about role play? Are you talking about development? So,
Getting started, I guess.
Getting started, just I don't know. As a DM, I mean, Hunter is probably it's you kind of have to find your own kind of flow, because I know Hunter is different from me in DMing. When I don't like to make a lot of, I like to make the world and then kind of make some story points and let the characters kind of go where they will. But that's just my style, and you just definitely need to find your style, because I know Hunter is a bit more linear in his progression. I could be wrong about that, I don't know, but
It's tricky. It's an art, like I said. When you're prepping what's going to happen in a session, you don't necessarily know that certain things will happen. So it can be easy to be like, what if this happens? What if this happens? And account for everything. And so to some extent, you have to trust yourself.
which has to be kind of frustrating for a DM, because sometimes it's like, no, just do this thing. Just do this simple, obvious thing. God damn it, progress the story. Oh, do this thing. Oh, you didn't. God damn it.
It can be. And like Athey was talking about, there are times like when you're like, as a DM, you're like, this is a small detail. It's not that important. They're not going to be worried about it. And then the players are like super invested.
I've seen that. I've seen that happen. I haven't done a lot of DMing, but I've done a little bit where it's like I had fucking almost novels of shit and nobody bit on the things that would lead them down these roads. And it was almost painful, because it was, for me, it was the story I wanted. But I had to let go of the story I wanted, because while you mentioned being like godlike as a DM, you're still at the mercy of the players, and you're still like, you create this world, but if they decide to break that magical item that you need to progress the story, you got to have a plan B or a backup or somewhere else you can take it, or just wing it. Is that
and
right?
sometimes you don't know, man. Like sometimes they're just gonna break through that wall. You never saw it coming, and at that point, you're like, you know what? Like, it's not necessarily your job to interfere, but you can just interpret that. Be like, all right, like it's gonna be hard, but you guys can like fucking mine your way through this wall if that's what you want to do, and then like. That's what happens, because that's what would happen if they decided to do it.
I once had a campaign where I put them in jail, and I had set up this entire if they did this, they could escape. Like they had to do all this thing, and then the guy goes, "I got a spoon, right? I'm just gonna start chipping away at the wall," and I'm like, "Okay." The spoon eventually just breaks, and he's like, "All right, I'm gonna wait till tomorrow, get another spoon," and I'm like.
But like think about the way things spiral. Like maybe this guy made a pocket, and what was he, like a prisoner or something?
It was the entire party was in jail, and I thought they would want to as soon as possible try to escape through this whole thing, and he's like, no, I'll just get a spoon and I'll just start digging a hole.
Well, that's a perfect example. Like if you're in a jail cell and you have a secret hole in the wall because one player just decides that they want to save spoons every day and dig a hole in the wall. Well, it's now you can stash shit in there. And so maybe because that person decided to do that, this other person's well, since we have the secret hole in the wall, I'm going to try and sneak this shank out from my lunch tray, and then it's now the party has a weapon. And the story progresses off of these tiny, tiny little details.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the crazy things about D&D is nobody knows what's really coming, even though everybody's contributing towards.
Yeah. You're going to escape the jail, and you just don't know how. And that's why a lot of the times I've not made. I've made some I'll make an elaborate escape route, but at the same time I'm not going to be solely focused on this, because I know that they're not going to actually use that.
Do you find yourselves frustrated when you come up with those little scenarios and they think outside of the box, and or are you just like, you know what, that was smart?
I love it. I love being surprised.
Yeah, same. There's like always the times where you're just like again, like I want to see if I can tie a rope to a ball, even though it's a ball, it'll probably slip off, and then throw the ball across the chasm and make it loop around a tree, and then I'll have a rope bridge. And you're like, that'll never work. Do it, please. Please do it. I want to see how this plays out. And they roll a natural 20, and you're like, well, you somehow...
So be it.
you somehow tied this so tight that the ball was just like... And then you just lassoed the tree, and then and you're like, all right, they did it. And then they go to, like, swing down, and they roll a 1 on their athletic check, like, hit the wall, like, Looney Tunes style, and fall down the cliff. Like, it's, like...
I would expect anyone that's lasted this long on this podcast probably knows that if you roll a 1d20, you're trying to determine whether you're successful at an action. If you roll a 20, it's called a critical success.
Yeah.
And then if you roll a 1, it's a critical fail. So if you get that 20, auto success, sometimes there are bonuses and benefits, and if you get the 1, sometimes there are penalties.
I always get penalties.
Yeah?
Oh man, there's critical fail. Critical fails are my favorite.
As a DM or as a player? I'm assuming as a DM.
Both, actually.
Really?
Like, I've definitely had times where I'm like, I like playing Warlocks a lot, especially Hexblade Warlocks, because you're basically just a charismatic fighter. And like, it's really funny to be like a character who, like, 9 times out of 10 can talk his way out of anything or into anything or do whatever, and then there's always the one time where you don't, and that's hilarious to me a lot of the times. You're just like, I'm so good at talking, and then you get thrown in jail, and then you have to carve your way out with this.
Well, and that speaks to the unpredictability of the game. One of the only times I played before I was an adult was in Boy Scouts, and I rolled a 1. I was kicking in a door. We were trying to sneak around through this hallway. It was in Pax Tarkus, I believe, which is a Dragonlance reference. I kick in a door, but I rolled a 1, so the door opens, hits the wall, flies back, closes, and alerts all the guards.
Yep.
So it's
That's
just
what
like,
I'm talking about.
Yeah.
but like, that's kind of the fun thing about it too, from my experiences. Those 20s can be exciting, those 1s can be exciting, and like you said, like, even as a character, maybe you're trying to accomplish something, but you roll that 1 and it sets this whole thing into motion that maybe you weren't planning on, or that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Yeah, but like, those are great stories. Like, those are stories you're gonna remember, and you're gonna talk to your friends and be like, yeah, remember that time I kicked in a door and it banged across the wall and
that was
alerted everyone?
20 years ago, and I'm talking about it right now.
Yeah, like, it's hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of times you'll just hear tables, like the whole table just busts out laughing.
Yeah, and it kind of goes along with what you were saying earlier about how we remembered those characters as our own memories. It's like, yeah, it's not like, you remember when my character Cyrus did this, it's remember when I bust through a door and it was like the door was 10 feet off the ground and I Looney Tunes in the air for 2 seconds and fell. Like,
Memorable moments.
yeah, but those are your memorable moments.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
So anything you guys want to add real quick?
Some quick advice for new players, in summary, or rather, starting with D&D. D&D is basically a highly immersive open world in which you can do anything, and if there's not rules for it, you can mod it like a Bethesda game, and you have full narrative control like a BioWare game, except you can even more freedom than that, really, because you're picking everything you say. If you want to be a good player, a couple tips in my opinion is to learn to play by playing with experienced players so that they can streamline your process, you can pick it up easier, and you will spend less time frustrated. Pick out a goal or a motive for your character that gives you something to do at every place you visit, So you're never thinking like, oh, what am I gonna do here? You know, what should I do? And between sessions, think of one way you can create a scene with each other party member the next session. If you have 4 people, right, 4 players, for instance, and each player thinks of a unique scene with the other 3 players, if my math is right, that's 12 scenes, each probably going to last about 5 minutes apiece, of purely player-generated content that creates immersion and develops both the characters and the plots between them. And for new DMs, I would say don't overwhelm yourself with detail. It's easy to do. I've done it myself. I would say plan it city by city in general. Like maybe be like, you guys are in this city, you know, and then throw a couple names out there. You know, you've got like Yarnborg and Port Hildian and Castle Yordegar. Detroit. If you guys want to go to Detroit,
Big mile right here.
It's there. But if you guys decide to go there, let me know, and you won't actually get there until next session. So that way you're not making like 5 different cities at once. That's an overwhelming amount of work, especially if you're making NPCs, you're making plot lines. Start small, and at the end of the session or between sessions, just ask your players, what do y'all want to do next session so I can prep for it? That way I'm not slammed. And my second tip for DMs would be leave little hooks for yourself to tie in later. They don't even have to mean anything. Just leave an object there. There's a strange letter there. This character makes this unusual decision. They wince when someone says this, but why would they do that? You all catch it. You don't know why. Doesn't even have to mean anything at first, but you can think about it between sessions and develop that later and be like, okay, she winced because she actually has the secret motive or that sort of thing. And you can figure it out later, but it makes you look really good when you're doing it because it's like little details, as if you had planned it out all along. And lastly, we were talking about party comp earlier. Pick creative players who are writers. They don't have to be. It just helps. If you have one player that creates a scene that creates engaging moments for the other players, even if it's just one player that does that, everybody gets to reap the benefits of that, and everybody gets to join in on that excitement. Play the game that your players like. You know, they are playing your game, but you are also providing their game. And for that matter, if you're a player, pick a DM that's willing to work with you, you know, and is not just going to steamroll everything or make you feel bad or make you feel you know, like you don't belong there in any kind of way.
And the moral of the story is you're playing it to have fun.
You're playing it to have fun. Everyone is.
Yeah. So familiarize yourself with some of the rules, get acquainted, understand how it works, but at the end of the day, you're not going to learn it all through reading. You're just going to have to get out there, find a game, do it, and then see if it sticks, find one you like, and make sure that you're having a good time while you do it. Anything to add?
No, I can't think of anything right now.
Perfect. All
Thanks.
right, guys, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, man.
Honestly, we could do this all day. We'll be doing more of these D&D podcasts. We'll be doing more podcasts in general over different games. Be sure to check out nerdjam.net. We've got some good content. We're only going to have more content rolled out in the near future. If you're hearing this today, which is the 6th of June, stick around for some Bloodborne content. It's going to be a lot of fun. Me and Finkel are going to die a lot. It's going to be very painful. And if you're not listening to this on the 6th of June, be sure to check it out on the website because it will be posted. And thank you so much, guys. This is Athey, this is Hunter, and I'm Matthew Wallen signing off with Nerd Jam.